Namo tassa bhagavato arahato sama sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato sama sambuddhassa. Greetings, everyone. I hope you've been doing well since the last time we spoke. I hope you've been smiling. I hope you've been residing in the Brahma Viharas and developing your mind. Today, I wanted to talk about one of the most important topics in understanding how the mind works, that is dependent origination. I have been trying out different ways to explain this. Today, I won't be using a sutta. Instead, I'll be using some slides to actually share more about this. And we'll also have an exercise. You may not be able to do the exercise during the talk, but I would really recommend that you give it a shot on your own time. So the talk will lay out how the exercise is to be done. And I hope you're able to do it and find some benefit of applying the understanding of the Dhamma to your own life. Okay, so I'll just share my screen and start with the discussion for today. So what we are going to do today is to start with understanding what models are and then understand how our mind creates models of reality and how we can use that understanding to our advantage. So just to lay the context, I wanted to start with a quote by a very famous British statistician. Interesting quote: all models are wrong, but some are useful. So what does that mean? It means anything that we represent with a model is an approximation of reality. When in many cases that approximation may be useful, in many cases that approximation may be harmful. So we need to be alert about when we can use a model to represent reality. I'll start with a couple of examples just to drive this thought in before we get into the dependent origination part. So the question is, do we experience reality or do we experience models of reality? What is it that we experience? I'll start with a couple of examples that will just challenge our notions of this. So I want you to take a look at this. This is a popular optical illusion. And I'd like you, if you can see that there is a square that is titled A and there is a square that is titled B. So if anyone believes A and B are the same color, you should just drop a message or something just to let me know that you think they are the same color. So everyone else thinks they're not the same color. So I have this box with the color of A, and you can see that even when it comes over B, the colors are exactly the same. So what's happening is our mind is modeling that there is a chessboard because we are familiar with the chessboard. We know what's a cylinder, and the cylinder is kept there. There is a source of light and there is shadows. And that is how we would see this situation normally. But it's a model. We have represented reality with a model. The actual reality is that the person who has developed this has very cleverly changed the colors in a way that we are not able to tell that these two are the same color. So our senses can deceive us at any point of time. Another example I wanted to give, so a profession that is famous for being objective in their interpretation of law or being fair, right? So study was done of over 1,000 cases of paroles that were handed out in parole cases that came up for judgment in Israel. This is around a 10, 12-year-old study. And they found a very funny thing. So at the beginning of a session, the judges gave almost a 65% rate of granting parole to people who came up in front of them. By the time it was lunchtime and the judges had not yet had their lunch, that percentage came down to almost zero. So they were modeling each case, they were assuming they are judging them very fairly. But there was inherent biases that came through simply because they were hungry and getting more restless. So the reason for giving these examples is to say that we often reduce reality. We always, in fact, not often, we reduce reality to models. And we should understand whether those models are really useful for us or are they actually causing us problems. And that is where the understanding of dependent origination can actually help us distinguish between these things. Like I mentioned, dependent origination is a central teaching of the Buddha. Just to highlight how important he thinks about it. This is from the Majjhima Nikaya, number 28. Sariputta says, now this has been said by the Blessed One. One who sees dependent origination sees the Dhamma, and one who sees the Dhamma sees dependent origination. So one can imagine how central this topic is when it comes to understanding the mind. So what I'm going to do is, instead of reading a sutta, a lot of the suttas that talk about dependent origination, they talk about the different links conditioning each other. Okay, so we will talk about the links and understand what those links are. What's written on the left, I will explain shortly. Okay, so the first link of dependent origination, it is typically presented as 12 links. There are different links that are presented in different suttas, but the 12 links is the typical usage that the Buddha does. So first link is Avijja or ignorance. What this means is not understanding how the mind works. We can say in brief. In detail, we can say not understanding the Four Noble Truths, not understanding dependent origination, and not understanding the characteristics of impermanence, impersonality, and suffering. So not understanding how the mind works, taking things personally as a result of that. So that being the base, Avijja or ignorance is the condition for Sankhara or Sanskar, personalized conditioning. What is personalized condition? So every time we take things personally, we don't understand how the mind is working. We assume that there is a permanent self at action. We assume things are permanent. We end up teaching ourselves that this is the way to understand the world. This is the way to make sense. So sanskara represents the conditioning, what the lessons that we have taught from ourselves, from all the actions that we have done, the way we have thought around those actions, and the experiences that we have had. So sanskara embodies all of those conditioning. And how does conditioning manifest? Conditioning manifests, somebody, you might tell a joke and one person may find it very funny, another person might find it offensive or hurtful. So what is different? It is the same person telling the joke. It is about maybe the same kind of characters, but the conditioning differs. So one person has a painful feeling arise from it, one person has a pleasant feeling arise from it. This is something we'll cover later. But why that happens is the way the impressions from actions we have done and experiences we've had have been solidified within us in terms of how we process situations, how we understand them, how we think about them, what our tendencies are. So avijja conditions as a with Avijja as a condition or ignorance as a condition, Sankhara or personalized conditioning comes to be. There are many names used for Sankhara: formations, fabrications. So these are some of the names that you might hear many times in different translations. Okay. Before we go, the whole links, I just want to make a comment that they follow the logic of the Four Noble Truths. If you remember the Four Noble Truths, the first truth is the truth of suffering, that there exists suffering. The second truth is the origin or samudaya, dukkha samudaya, which is that suffering is dependent on craving, or craving is the origin of suffering. The third noble truth is the cessation of suffering, which happens through the cessation of craving. So the Buddha says, and this is the way he understands mental phenomena and presents them also. He always looks for dependency. What is the root cause for a certain phenomenon? What are the underlying conditions that make it happen? For that underlying condition, what are the underlying conditions? And because these are conditions on which the next thing is dependent, so the understanding is always that if the dependent conditions are removed, those conditions, those phenomena that are arising based on those conditions will also cease. So with the ceasing of craving, suffering will cease. And it is the same with these 12 links, this causality, the root cause, and this relationship of dependency. That is why it is called dependent origination. Dependent on one condition, another condition comes. If the first condition ceases to be, the next condition ceases to be. So you can imagine this as a series of floors in an apartment building. So if the floor below weakens or crumbles or is this not existing anymore, then the floors above will not have anything to sustain. With sanskara or personalized conditioning as a base, as a condition, consciousness or Vigyan comes to be. Consciousness can be thought of in multiple ways. One important way is it is the faculty that allows us to discern what is happening. So if you see 5 people, you're able to discern those people from the background. You're able to know whether we are able to discern humans from animals. You are able to discern different complexions. You're able to discern different heights, for instance. So consciousness processes information in our environment. The other thing consciousness also is responsible for is experience. The fact that we have an experience comes because of consciousness being operational. With consciousness as condition, mentality-materiality comes to be. In a way, you can think of mentality-materiality as the link between the mental processes, the consciousness, the sanskar, these processes, and the physical realm. So mentality-materiality connects the mental realm to the physical realm. A very interesting thing is mentality-materiality conditions consciousness as well. So we won't go too much into that, but in a very brief way, this is part of the mind-body linkage, right? So how you think, how you feel, how you experience things affects how your body is, and how your body is affects how your experience is. So mentality, materiality, and consciousness condition each other. With mentality, materiality as a condition, we have sense basis or the Salayatana, the 6 sense bases: eye, ear, nose, tongue, body, and mind. So all of these are bases that are capable of receiving information. So for example, a mammal like the bat, which doesn't have eyes, cannot process visual information. And we can process certain parts of visual information. We can process certain wavelengths, we can't process other wavelengths. So sense bases are our window to the world. Everything that we experience comes from what can be processed by our sense bases. So this is part of the materiality. So these 5 links form the foundation of how we are coming into this present moment. So if we look at using dependent origination to understand our experience in this moment. These five links, these are part of the current foundation. What we come, the nature, our configuration, our system as we come into this moment. Now, what happens? Now we are there in the world and something happens in the environment. So it could be a sound, it could be a sight that we see, it could be a smell that comes to us, it could be a touch on our skin or an internal movement in our body that we are able to feel tangibly. It could be a thought that comes to us. So now this is the first time that the system as it is, the person, the being as it is now interacting with the world in this moment. Sense base comes together with consciousness. So the consciousness below is the potential for consciousness. It gets activated when contact happens. So sense base, consciousness, and external information or internal information in the form of a thought. So these three come together to form an information event. Some event has happened in life. This is contact. With each contact, there comes up Vedana or feeling. So with contact as condition, feeling comes to be. Again, we continue to have this basis. So if there is no sense base, for example, if you don't have the physical sense basis of the eye, you cannot have eye contact. So contact can be of different type. Contact can be at any of the sense base. So you need the other conditions, the other links that are below to be in place for you to be able to have the next link arise. So with contact as condition, feeling comes to be. Feeling is pleasant or painful or neutral. Feeling tells us even before we know what is happening, it says that I need attention. Something is happening here that is important, that needs attention. So we took that example of a joke, for instance. So if that joke is offensive to you, hurts you in some way, your mind represents it as your entire system represents it as a painful feeling. Hey, something is happening that bothers you, that you are not okay with. So let us create a painful feeling. And the same thing happens if you step on a thorn, for instance, you'll have a painful feeling before you know it's a thorn, even before you know exactly what part of your body is affected by this. Or if you open the tap and you find that extremely hot water is coming out from there, so you'll get a painful feeling. On the other hand, you might taste something that is extremely delicious and you'll immediately have a pleasant feeling. Or you might just smell some food that you really like and you may have a pleasant feeling. So feeling is trying to, there are a lot of contacts that are happening in your mind at the same time. You're seeing things, you're hearing things, smelling things, touching things. Feeling tries to tell the mind where are the threats or opportunities. What are the things we need to be beware of? What are the things we need to look at as potential opportunities? What can be rewarding? With feeling as condition, craving comes to be. So till now, we have a being which has in place ignorance, personalized conditioning, consciousness, mentality, materiality, and sense basis. That being had an interaction with the environment. Contact happened and a feeling came up. From this point onwards, we start the journey of personalizing what's happening and starting to use those models that I was talking about. So the first thing that happens, craving as attention, feeling draws attention, craving wraps around it, personalizes it, says, I like it, I don't like it. If it is a painful feeling, I don't like it. Your mind instinctively knows this is something I don't want to exist in the world. This is not an experience I want. I must do something to take it away. I must do something to get out of this. You might have heard of a fight, flight, or freeze response, right? So evolutionarily, animals want to either, if they sense danger, they want to either fight, they want to either run away, or they will be so scared that they'll freeze over there. So those kind of things, as if we don't like something, we will start going into that kind of a mode. I don't like it. And the other extreme can be I like it. I will do anything to make this, to have more of this experience. So craving is very simple at this point. It doesn't have any conceptions of what is happening, but it just says painful feeling, I want less of it, and pleasant feeling, I want more of it. Starts taking it personally. With craving as condition, clinging comes to be Upadana or clinging. So now we need to get into the why. Why do I want it? Why don't I want it? So the mind, if you notice your mental chatter, your mind is continuously trying to make sense of our reality. What is my life about? What do I want? What do I want right now? What do I want next? What do I have to do? Why did I do something in the past? So there is a consistent commentary that's happening that is trying to make sense of our lives. So clinging tries to now make a story of the situation. Upadan says, okay, this is what is happening. I am here. There is something painful that is happening, and I need to act on that. Why do I like this? Why don't I like this? What do I think about other people in that circumstance? What do I think about the world? Right. So, all these models, and these models, like I said, are representations of reality. They need not be reality. So, simple example that is used often to understand this, right? So, you might be driving on a road and you might see somebody speeding, driving dangerously, cutting you off, and going ahead. So you have created a certain opinion of that person, what kind of person they must be based on what vehicle they are driving, the way they are driving. You will create an opinion of it. You will say that I don't like it. I don't like people who behave like this. People like this should not be allowed to get away with it. We should have stronger law enforcement. You might go into all kind of story making. So you also start giving rise to mental proliferation. And you feel helpless because you couldn't do anything about it. You are in a world that you had an experience that you didn't like and you couldn't do anything about it. Now, at the same time, if you were told that actually this was somebody rushing someone to the hospital for an emergency operation, you would look at it completely differently. So we tell stories and we assume these are real. We assume these are permanent. We assume that the identity that we assume that we take on at that time, that I am somebody who couldn't do anything. I live in a city that doesn't care about its citizens. I want to be more powerful on the road, or I don't want to be driving on the road at all. I want to move to a place where I can work from home. So all those thoughts come, you create an identity that is fighting against reality. And you create an opinion of other people, of the world around you. So clinging is conditioned by craving because you make up a story dependent on whether you like it or whether you don't like it. If you don't like it, you make a story that is unfavorable. If you like it, you will make a story differently about it. With clinging as condition, habitual tendencies come to be. So we do not we don't create original actions every time we encounter a situation. We rely on our habits, our old patterns. We may do something slightly unique, slightly different at a moment, but it is always based in habits that we've had. So, for example, if you have an habit of honking, you might honk. If you have a tendency of getting agitated, you might chase after that vehicle, or you might just grumble continuously. You might complain to people around you, or you might carry it with you. Be frustrated. Just take it in and get frustrated, internalize that irritation. So based on your habitual pattern, so now you are how we what happened is you had an interaction with the environment. You're telling yourself a story of what happened, and you are finding out what is the best response for it. Right. So habitual patterns helps you to select response without trying to solve the problem from beginning every time. So another example I'll give you is if you are crossing the road and a vehicle is coming towards you. Right? Craving tells you, I don't like it. Clinging tells you, I need to get out. And you immediately take an action of running. Right? You don't start to calculate the speed of the vehicle. You don't start to think about what are the 5 different things I can do. right now, or whether the person will stop or not. You just make a run for it, right? So in these instances of survival, this is very useful. Craving, clinging helps us to stay safe. Habitual patterns helps us to stay safe. If we had to figure out what to do, you already knew from your old understanding experience of life, you know that the sidewalk is a safe space. You know that you can get there in 1 second. Right? So you use that knowledge to your advantage. But at the same time, if you look at other situations, these same patterns may be harmful for you. So somebody says something, you interpret it in a certain way because you have an opinion of that person, and you keep holding that grudge and you keep getting frustrated about it. Those are habitual patterns that do not help us. All models are wrong, but some models are useful. Dependent on habitual tendencies, action or reaction, birth of a reaction comes to be. So this is the action that you're taking. Habitual patterns are pushing you towards a set of actions, and this is finally an action that your mind chooses to perform at that point of time. This behavior is compulsive. So now what has happened is we have completely relied on old experiences, old tendencies, old understandings of the world, old opinions we have of ourselves, old opinions we have of others, and just reverted to habits. It's very comfortable, it's very effortless. To think about a certain situation from scratch, objectively, try to see what is the most wholesome action takes more effort. So we tend to slip into older patterns. And all of this is coming from our personalized conditioning. And all of this is also reinforcing our personalized conditioning, how we make sense of the world and how we act. With birth of a reaction as condition, aging and death comes to be. Consequences of that action. So when you put a stone in the water, the ripples don't end there. The ripples travel far and wide. They affect other things. So once we take an action, there are consequences of that action. No matter what we do, it is not leading us to continued satisfaction because it was based on craving, because it was based on I like it or I don't like it. If I like it, I want more of something. If I'm not able to get it, I'm dissatisfied. If I'm able to get it, after some time, my experience of that will change. So I will get dissatisfied. If I'm able to get it, I will want to make sure it doesn't go away. I will be afraid about it. I will be possessive about it and lead to dissatisfaction. If I don't like it and I don't have more of that experience in my life, I will be happy, but I'll be fearful that it may happen. If I don't like it and that experience comes into my life, I will be unhappy. So no matter what happens, when we personalize ourselves with an outcome in a situation, we are setting ourselves up for suffering. Because when we do this, we also think that we are personal and we think of ourselves as a eternal self, something that is continuous, something that is going to be permanently damaged by this experience. So consequences come as a, and if you look at it the other way around, consequences are based on actions. Actions are based on habitual patterns. Habitual patterns are based on the way we interpret the world. Our interpretation of the world is based on how personally we relate to a particular event in our environment. How we relate personally depends on how intense is the feeling, the Vedana that is generated by that event. How we feel about that event is based on the contact actually happening. You having a sense space, you having consciousness, and you having that external information coming. So, for example, if my eyes are closed, I don't see the world. If something were to happen, grotesque were to come in front of me right now, I would not get a painful feeling. Something beautiful were to come in front of me, I would not get a pleasant feeling. So, these things are prerequisite for feeling to come up. What is requisite for contact to come up? The sense bases are requisite for contact to come up. What is requisite for sense bases to come up? Mentality, materiality. What is requisite for mentality materiality to come up? Consciousness. What is requisite for consciousness to come up? Personalized conditioning or formations. What is requisite for formations to come up? Ignorance. So this is the chain of dependent origination that the Buddha teaches. Let us look at it from the, so I said from one perspective, we can see it has a similar structure to the Four Noble Truths in the sense that something is dependent on another thing, and without the condition that is necessary for the next thing to be, it will cease to be. The other thing in the Four Noble Truths is the truth of the origin of suffering. So if we look at this set of links, right? So at this moment, when you come into this moment, you cannot change the current foundation. You already have that in place. And you cannot necessarily change the contact that happens and the feeling that happens. So once that has happened, craving is the first part that you can start acting. Once you can start to recognize the tension and tightness in your mind and use the 6 R's. So with the help of mindfulness and 6 R's, you can diffuse the craving. Instead of thinking that I like it or I don't like it, you can assume that something happened. The vehicle, speeding vehicle, cut you off. Instead of thinking I don't like it and thinking a lot of other things about it, you can simply understand that a vehicle cut off. Immediately you can check if there is any damage around you in your vehicle. Nothing. It hasn't affected you in any way. If you don't take it personally, if you don't start the process of craving, the rest of the links will cease to be. So any action that you take will not be based on craving, will not lead to dissatisfaction, but it will be wholesome and it will allow you to continue. For instance, you may simply make a wish that may all people be safe while this person is driving like this, right? You don't need to form a bad opinion of the person. You can understand they are behaving compulsively. They have some compulsion that makes them go that way. Whether that is wholesome, unwholesome, you are not in a position to decide. So you wish them well, you wish other people well. There is no other action you can take at that point. If at all, you can maybe, if you feel that this person is going to continue to be a threat to other people, you can maybe inform the police about the license plate number or something. That is some action that you can take. But worrying about it, getting frustrated is based on craving, and it is something that is not useful. When we exit craving, we can create a more wholesome model of reality. We can understand, is this affecting our lives? Is there some action that we can do, or is it just something that we are unhappy about? And accordingly, your action can be wholesome. So you wish people well, or you can make, as a dutiful citizen, you can make a report to the police. And the consequences are very different. So you started feeling badly, you were grumpy on your entire way to office. As soon as you got to office, somebody did something, you got irritated, you shouted at them. By the evening, you were feeling unhappy. You came home, you took that out on your family. So this is the consequences, the ripples from that unwholesome action can be very large. And the ripples from a wholesome action can also be large, but they come without craving. They come with the benefit of everyone in mind. So that is the edifice, the apartment of dependent origination, which each floor dependent on the previous floor. And our agency primarily lies when we, in any moment, at any point of time, we will always have contact, we'll always have feeling coming to us at any point of time. By the best point for us to act right now in a situation that we are at this point is to remove craving and move towards wholesome outcomes. So that is how we exit the path of personalized actions. And those actions that we take that are without craving, they have wisdom as a base, and they start building a separate apartment next to this one with wisdom as a base, with conditioning that is based on wisdom, consciousness that is based on wisdom, mentality, materiality that is based on wisdom, sense bases that are based on wisdom, contact that is based on wisdom, and feeling that is based on wisdom. So it starts changing your entire conditioning. What happens is, a few times you do that, then rash driving on the road doesn't affect you negatively at all. You don't even have a painful feeling that you would have craving towards. You may have a neutral feeling and you may have equanimity. So you're able to understand what's happening. Even though there is no painful feeling, you can make a note of it and take wholesome action. So that is how you use the understanding of dependent origination in the moment. But what happens if the situation is more complex? So people have very complex relationships with colleagues, with family members, with spouses, with children, complicated situations, relationships with themselves about who I am, what I am doing, what can I do. How do you start planning for those things? So one thing is to be mindful in the moment, to use the 6 hours as soon as you detect craving. Great strategy overall, but how do you start planning maybe, or start to understand what could be better wholesome actions that you can take? Everybody does not have a very well developed intuition, or there may be situations that are extremely unfamiliar. You don't have any habits to lean on that are wholesome, right? So how do you start planning for those things, planning for those kind of situations? So quickly, I'll just take 10 minutes to go through this. This is an exercise that I would like you to do. Listen to the talk again and spend some time taking a complex situation that you want to change in your life. So it may be an addiction, it may be a relationship with somebody, it may be a relationship with your workplace or a colleague. It could be something to do maybe with your body image. So try to do this exercise at home, and I will just briefly describe what to do, how to use the understanding of dependent origination. So anything that you do should be always supported by Dana, Shila, Bhavana. So whatever you do in terms of Dana, Shila, Bhavana helps you to understand the world differently from what you're conditioned to, the models that you default to, the poor representations of reality that are not helping you move away from suffering. So to start moving away from that, you need to have continuous practice. You need to keep your precepts, because every time we break a precept, we teach our mind, we strengthen the ignorant condition. We teach our mind that it is okay to do something as long as we can justify what we did, right? It is okay. So keeping the precepts and generosity, staying in the Brahma Viharas, doing acts of generosity is a great way for us to start breaking the cycles, not just using the 6 hours, but also starting to plan and anticipate more complex situations. Current foundation, difficult to change. The only way to change that is through continuously doing wholesome actions and making changes to your conditioning. And that is where Dana, Shila, Bhavana helps very strongly. Now, what can we do about? So take one situation that really bothers you, okay, and do this writing exercise. So the first part of this after the current foundation is contact. Coming together of sense bases, external information, and Vijnana, or ability to process information. First thing you can think is, how can I modify my environment? So I may have a problem with a certain person, and I may find that it is I who always make sure, that I'm spending time with that person when we don't maybe need to. Maybe I keep my fridge stocked with things that I know are not good for me, that I should not be eating. But since it is there, there is unwholesome contact of your eye with that thing that you don't want to be eating or drinking, and it sets off a chain of craving. So you are setting yourself up for failure. Is it possible to change the environment? Is it possible, for example, you have a ongoing argument with somebody about a parking slot? So is it possible for you simply to just give that parking slot to that person and eliminate that contact? Right? Is it really painful to you? Is it really creating a huge loss in your life? Think about that. What can I do to modify my environment so that the contacts I experience are different? Feeling is part of our conditioning. difficult to change. Again, wholesome actions will make the feelings less painful or less pleasant. The more painful it is, the higher the chances of craving being very strong in that case. So what we can do is we can observe how painful or pleasant the feeling is, and both of these things we can anticipate. So we know, for example, if we are going to a work meeting, we know that there are two people who will say some things. So we can already in our mind anticipate that this contact is probably going to happen and these feelings are going to come up. So making that note, writing it down, and then making a mental note before you are exposed to that situation helps you to be more mindful, right? So for example, when you sit to meditate, you decide, you already know that you want to be mindful, so you're using the 6 hours. Maybe after your meditation, you become lax about it, right? So anticipating a situation helps you to be mindful and use the 6 hours better. This is central if you've been practicing. Without using the 6 hours, without calming down the craving that has come up in a situation, there is no way you will go towards a wholesome outcome. So you must use the 6 hours, be mindful. Again, you can anticipate when that you may need to do it. But some situations become even more complex. So situations with family members, with spouses, for example, they have lots of information, right? So you may decide you cannot change the environment too much. You cannot change the feeling too much because you have deeply embedded issues about these, right? So when it comes to clinging and to habitual patterns, right, we need to spend some time actually understanding. This is where the understanding that models are not reality. Models are just representation of reality. Understanding of the three characteristics. That's my taking things personally leads to suffering. My thinking things are permanent leads to suffering. So when we have a problem with somebody, we think you always behave this way. You never do this thing for me, right? So try to put down how you interpret this situation. How do you feel about yourself? How do you identify yourself? Are you somebody who's right and the other person is wrong? Are you somebody who's generous and the other person is exploiting you? Are you somebody that is, being betrayed? Whatever it is. Are you somebody that doesn't that feels disrespectful about something, right? So how does this situation make you feel? How do you identify? How do you represent other people? And is that true? When you say this person is dishonest, when you say this person is unkind, is it true that you have never seen them do something unkind, something kind? Is it true that you have never seen them uh, have integrity about things? So look at how you identify yourself, how you identify other people, and try to make a note of how can I interpret this differently. This will not make your conditioning different immediately. Your response to that situation may also not differ immediately. But the fact that this possibility exists, that there is a way that I can interpret this situation in a way that makes me feel less small, less powerless, less frustrated, less in conflict with reality. That will fill up the vacuum that your mind creates when we use craving. When we are not going to our habitual patterns, we need something else, right? And in complex situations, unfortunately, we keep defaulting back to habitual patterns. So we use this understanding, we make a note of this, we write this down so that our mind has some idea of how can I interpret this situation differently. Can you simply say it looks like you are suffering and how can I help you? Can that be your model of this situation? Can you simply understand the other person is acting out their compulsions, and the best you can do is be compassionate towards them? Can you take that frame of mind? Can you identify that person not as somebody who's taking advantages of you, but somebody who's being compulsive? So write this, and once you've done this, the important thing is understand how you act. Understand what are the consequences of your actions on yourself, on other people. How do you feel the rest of the day when you act in compulsive patterns? how does the other person feel when you act in compulsive patterns? In the same situation, does it make them be more compulsive? Does it get even, we often replay similar arguments with people, that it's always the same set of accusations being traded. Can we break that cycle? Can we do it differently? Now comes thinking about what is the different options that you can do. Again, when you come to reality, so it's a common saying when it comes to planning for war, for example, that all plans go out of the window at first contact. So as soon as you enter a battle, all the plans that you've made are now fictional. But the act of planning helps your mind to consider different possibilities, right? So this exercise will help you think, what are the different types of wholesome actions that I can take that are improving consequences for me and for other people. You may not get it right in the first few times. You can continue to revise your notes, you can continue to go through this exercise, and over time your mind will internalize this, and over time your intuition will become strong of what you can do in that moment. Yes, so that was a brief presentation on the understanding of dependent origination, understanding of how our behavior emerges, and how craving is the point that helps us to stop going into compulsive patterns, where the craving is extremely strong, where we have really personalized, we find it very difficult to be impersonal about the situation. How can you anticipate and modify your environment, and also consider different courses of actions for that situation? Happy to hear thoughts and questions. If it rang a bell with you, if there's some situation in your life you'd like to apply it to, think about it. If there was something confusing, you can ask those questions. Or make a comment, share a comment. If you've tried something like this in your life, that will be great for everybody to hear and learn from. Yes, you. Good day.
Good day. Yes, thank you very much for that presentation. And the way dependent origination works is as you described. What I find is that working with the really small things first is really helpful, because I think some of the bigger things are more overwhelming. We always get to a point, I think, when we get caught up with stuff that's quite big, is, if you like, the benefit of hindsight. So there's a reflective component, which is very good to look at as well. So that looking at events that are reflecting back on them, and trying to see the stages that we went through is really helpful, because often we can't see that at the time, because one of the things about craving is it shuts down our awareness. So
yeah,
we go into this tunnel vision, and then we've just got about that. So what I would add to what you've described is the reflective component. Go back, and go back as soon as you can, whilst it's still fresh, because that's really helpful. So if you've had a difficult meeting and you've come out of a difficult meeting, just go off for 5 minutes, make yourself a cup of coffee or something, and just think about the process that's gone through, and all of the aspects that have occurred for you as an individual, including the way it feels physically, including the way the mental constructs you've gone through, the emotional response you've had, because that will reveal the complexity that you've gone through as an individual. But if we do this more and more often, what we'll see is our underlying patterns, and they're individual. The construct of the dependent origination is the same for all of us. Our individual expression of dependent origination, the more we can begin to see the early warning signs.
Absolutely. So in fact, that is exactly the reason why I have suggested this as a writing exercise, is to reflect on the way you have acted in the past, because you already identify that these are things that you do that end up being dissatisfactory for you, and see whether I can modify the environment, whether I can, how did I conceive of myself, how did I identify, how did I conceive of the other person, and what can I do differently in the future. So it is a reflection exercise, absolutely, like you mentioned. And also completely, I think what you really said, I think it's very useful to highlight, is starting with the small things, right? So we start training our mind that there is a wholesome pathway. That is where keeping the precepts and continuing your practice helps, using it for smaller things, just in the instant, being aware of craving, getting rid of craving before you try to attempt more complex situations. So that is trying to teach your mind that there exists a alternative to habitual pattern. Yes.
One other thing with the precepts is the precepts are really helpful because our attempt to stay with the precepts reveals resistance, and not to feel that the resistance is a failure, but it's actually the precepts working, and then to explore the nature of that resistance. And you can do that with the dependent origination process that you've described, because we can see that process and begin to unpick it. So then the precepts become our friends, because they reveal this resistance, and that's
Great. Any other thoughts or comments?
Hi, Rajiv. Yes, I've got a comment. It's just about something you said there with the anticipation, which I think is a really it's a balance point for us to navigate, because if we anticipate a move into worrying, then we're anticipating something that hasn't even happened. So it's how do you, I think it's an interesting area, how to use the anticipation wisely so that it sets us in a frame of mind that's very open around the next moment that we're moving into and who we might meet. So yeah, the 6 R's obviously super helpful, and then the using that preparation time to bring up skillful states of mind. So that's just what I wanted to add, because I can see that's
a great point, Sarah, actually. In fact, you would, if you sat down and did this exercise, you will see in that point itself, right? Your images of yourself and that person and that relation you don't need to wait for that environment, for that contact to happen. That contact is already happening in that moment, and it's a great way to kind of understand reflect on how you've been thinking of yourself and the other person. So yes, while doing this exercise, I think that's a great point Sarah's added. Be mindful of craving coming up, and using the 6 R's because you may end up creating compulsive tendencies in your mind while planning not to be compulsive. So that's a great thought, Sarah. Thanks for adding that.
If I could just add something in there as well, by way of extension of what Sarah's just said, is that we often do this because we're not comfortable with the gap of not knowing what's going to happen. And so we'll fill in something, even if it's uncomfortable, it's familiar. And so we go back into a safe place in our mind, even though it's an uncomfortable one and one we might not like. Whereas what we need to be able to do, if you like, is just encounter's going to be like. And that then keeps us open and listening. Whereas when we just go into this automatic process, we've stopped listening. We've stopped listening to ourselves because we've imposed an image in our own mind about how we are and what we're going to do, the circumstances or the context. And so part of this process is getting used to a feeling of not knowing and that being okay, and moving into the next moment from a place of not knowing. And that's where you can apply your meditation again by holding that space for yourself. In the same way that you're being asked to in the practice of simply being the observer, not trying to fill in the context of your practice or the anticipation of what your practice will show you or what it will feel like or an image of where you're going, but just staying as the observer, staying with what is, and having that, if you like, pregnant expectation or anticipation of the next moment without knowing what it is.
True. To your point, I think the idea of sharing this was for, again, for this specific exercise is more for more complex situation, because where people find that they regularly forget to go into that mode of observing what is happening and reacting in a wholesome way, right? So that is just using the 6 hours, right? For simpler situations, just using the 6 hours and taking that I out of the equation and responding wholesomely to that. So that is something to be practiced all the time. But what happens is often people have trouble with the vacuum that comes from not having their habitual patterns and not knowing how to respond to a complex situation. So that is where the preparation helps. And in terms of, again, in terms of thinking, how can I have a different self-image? The answer is the Brahma Viharas, right? So understand that no matter what, instead of saying that I'm going to say this, I'm going to be this kind of person, you can simply say, I will act with compassion, I will act with loving kindness. You can at least make that determination and understand that there are actually other paths, because often we feel that there is no other option than to do what we do, even if we are not breaking a precept. Our mind reinforces that logic that there was no other option in this situation. So being able to see, if you just open yourself to the possibility for very complex situations, to that there is a possibility, if your mind is based in the Brahma Viharas, to act differently. Just having the knowledge of that possibility can help you. Like, you may not end up doing that, you may not, the situation may be completely different, but you need something to help you fill the space that is vacated by your habitual tendencies, right? So that is where this I see this exercise helping people.
When we get that sense of space, we feel vulnerable and undefended. And but what we don't always realize is that the loving kindness is the only defense we need. If we can bring up the loving kindness and be present with that, then we not only have we filled the void, but we've actually changed the dynamic that we're moving into.
Absolutely. It's an empowered image of what you are, rather than a cornered, diminished image of what you can do. Any other comments or thoughts?
Yeah. Yes, I would like to say something. I'm Dr. Sunanda
Yes.
Hegde. This is actually dependent origination is a very complex subject, but you have made it very simple and very easy to understand. So thank you so much for giving this lecture. I'm really very amazed. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu.
You're most welcome. Sadhu. I'll wait for another minute, or we will share merit and end the session for today. Okay, so just give me a moment. I'll just share the screen and we can all share merit. May suffering once be suffering free, and the fear struck fearless be. May the grieving shed all grief, and may all beings find relief. May all beings share this merit that we have thus acquired for the acquisition of all kinds of happiness. May enlightened beings of mighty power share in this merit of ours. May they long protect the Buddha's dispensation. Sad, sad, sad.
Thank you very much,
Yeah,
Rajiv.
thank you, Rajiv.
Great to see you.
Thank you,
Thank you so
everyone.
much.
Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.